my opinion, as it stands today, and I think I'm being fair here, this kind of censorship and intolerance of difference of opinion is far more prevalent with the progressive left than it is with the conservative right.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, an incredibly popular one. We need a national divorce. We need to separate by red states and blue states. And let's get to politics, since I put it in the thing yesterday, then we didn't get to it. All right, so I think we all remember our boy Charlie here, who went pretty viral. How? One second, I'm actually kind of curious. He's got 119,000 subscribers, way more than I have, and I'm certainly deserving of more subscribers. And his "What Are We Doing to White People" video, which you can find on my YouTube channel. And whenever I make this a segment, I'm probably going to put a little thing up here, like right now. So Josh in the future, remember to do that. Yeah, like this got 3.5 million views. Before this, most of his videos were getting anywhere between, what are we talking? Before that video, like anywhere between 10 and 35 thousand views, all the way up to 300 mil. And now this video that we're about to watch, and the video that came out after the white people video, garnered about just shy of, just a little bit over. Actually, no, I'm incorrect. I read that incorrectly. The video that came out after the white people video got about almost 500,000 views. This only got 42,000. So we're probably looking at a channel that had one big rise because they were, what's the word? Because they were kind of the hot new thing for conservatives to pretend to have some kind of a stake in. And now that it's kind of over, that's not really as much of a, like, I think it doesn't seem like a lot of staying power. But I always want to kind of keep up, like, and kind of go back and check on, kind of follow up with somebody that has watched a video of, who's like smaller, planning on doing it with that other channel whose name I completely forget that guy's name. He's just like a rapper or some nonsense. There's that religion video from last week or the week before. But regardless of size, I want to see what else he's kind of bringing to the table. And it looks like part of the grift is going to be the, oh, well, I've been told that I'm a right-leaning or right-winger, or that I'm parroting right-wing talking points. I am a centrist. So, like, let's hear him out. Let's see how much of a centrist he is, even though I'm sure I'm not going to hear very many critiques of the right wing or even of right-wing politics on here. But I could be wrong.
Everyone, if you're tuning in for the first time, welcome. My name is Charlie. Today, let's talk about a relatively easy topic. I want to lay out a relatively radicalization. As someone who used to hold some pretty radical leftist beliefs, and I'll be sharing some of the tips that I've used. I
would love to hear what those radical leftist beliefs are.
Just as background, I started this YouTube channel around a year ago, and for most of that year, I got like a few hundred views each video, and then the video I uploaded a few weeks ago called "The Algorithm Way" and got over 1 million views. And the first thing that I felt, well, there were a lot of.
Isn't it also a wonder how, like, these right wing, like these kind of like right wing like parrot like videos end up like blowing up in the algorithm? Like, this dude's made like a total of, let's take a look, 1 2 3 4 5 11 videos, like 11 videos in the span of just under a year, and already is looking at like a million view channel. Meanwhile, like you can check out any amount of like leftist content creators. There is not this kind of like out of nowhere spike. So it's kind of, at least from my perspective, it's rather obvious that the algorithm seems to really like right-wing commentators. There's just a real deep interest in pushing a lot of this stuff. And it's, at the end of the day, guys like Matt Walsh get a ton of views on every single video. Ben Shapiro, the same. The right wing right now on YouTube is, being right wing is the meta right now. I think Xander Hall made a good point about kind of heading into a sort of Gamergate 2.0 era here on YouTube. And I tend to think he's kind of he's mostly on the mark. Now we don't know when it's gonna happen. I tend to think that like we might already be in it. We just haven't gotten out of it and are able to look back and see how bad things have gotten. But you never really know when the wave hits until you don't know when the wave started. You just suddenly were bombarded with like all these like topics, all this discourse and everything else. But certainly certainly YouTube seems to have a bit of a bias, but
a lot of things I was
what can you say?
But primarily I felt
we work hard regardless.
Because up until then, it was people within my own circles watching my videos, and then all of a sudden, like I had complete strangers commenting, making reaction videos about me and stuff.
Ooh, am I on here? I'm probably not. No, I'm not on here. Boo! Why didn't you put me? Oh, okay. Let's see. Do I know? Okay, so I think what's okay? Top left. I don't know who the top left one is. I know the middle left one is Vosh. I think the bottom one might be is that Shark? Is Shark under the Vosh video? Possibly, I can't tell. I think that's Heem above Vosh also. Anyway, I was just looking. I'm sad I'm not on this. Like, what the fuck?
And some of it negative, and yeah, I felt afraid. But really, it's something that I want to train myself to get used to, because if I want to do this, share my opinions publicly, people are free to criticize it in turn. I hope my channel grows, and I'll have the opportunity to reach more people and have them.
It's kind of how this whole thing works.
Things that I bring up, so I should be grateful, and I hope it continues. I also want to learn to stop worrying about things that are, beyond my control. To be clear, what people think about me is for sure within my control.
This is unrelated, but I'm pretty sure this person lives in like this looks like a studio to me, which let me just say, let me reach out with with some camaraderie. If this is a studio, because this looks pretty small, looks like everything's kind of all collected in this little area. Man, I feel that. I lived in a studio for a little bit. I feel that right there.
To the extent that the biggest determinant of that is what I say and how I say it. But I'm also coming to learn that there will also be people, regardless of what I say, who will jump to conclusions and not want to hear me out, which is, I don't blame them, because, I think that it's something that all of us do to one degree or another, myself included.
Well, there's jumping to conclusions, and then there's
the reason why I'm saying all of this,
reading between the lines. Like,
about how
when you make videos about political rhetoric, like when you make political videos, like the things you say, the things that you imply, and the things that you like gesture towards say more about what you're trying to communicate than what you're literally communicating. Politics specifically is not a realm where the thing you say, the exact words you say, are not a one-to-one to the message you are communicating. So like, again, this is like one of those things where it's like, if you don't want that, then don't make videos on politics, because that's how this is gonna go. Like, you're going to get pushback and criticism.
In reality, teaching things that is completely antithetical to true racial justice. I got a good number of people saying, this and that, like, oh, like you must be far right.
It's also like when you say the far left or the left, that's also a,
the party line, and
I know I'm talking, but like when you say stuff like the left, it's like that's nobody knows what that is. Everybody's version of the left is going to be informed by a lot of different things. You need to be more specific if you want to actually like communicate properly and not get that pushback, not be irresponsible.
Mainstream woke views as being some, right-wing Republican, whatever. But I want to make this video in part to send a message to those folks that think this way, that there are a lot of people, including moderates and liberals in the traditional sense, not just right-wing conservatives, who are not okay with the direction that the woke crowd is taking our civil discourse, and you're alienating a lot of people.
Yeah, and woke.
I want you to know, and I know this from having
woke doesn't mean anything
about the people around me.
I've asked many normal people what woke is, and
extra isolated echo chamber.
They can never.
There are many around you who are nodding along to what you're saying.
They can very much like never explain to me what that is.
People that will attack them and try to ruin their personal lives, and B, they've come to learn that it's nearly impossible to have a fruitful dialogue with someone who believes that to hold any other view than the one they hold is to be oppressive. I mean, you think that the people who oppose you must be some sort of an extremist because you're not aware that what you believe in is itself extreme. Because if you did, you wouldn't believe in it, which is, sort of the whole point.
This is okay. So doesn't this? Am I crazy? I thought he said he's like a lawyer or something. Like, again, you're not assessing. Let's see, law student. Okay, cool. And he's in Philadelphia. No wonder. Like, when it comes down to it, like, your argument of like, oh well, you don't know it's extreme. Well, the question is, you need to be assessing what is and what isn't extreme. What people would say that my views are extreme or far left, right? But like, what's measuring that is going to be based on your society's like Overton window, your society's acceptable level of political ideology, basically. For decades in this country, you could not identify, literally, as anything left of liberal because it was tantamount to supporting the Soviet Union. We had an entire time period, decades of like oppressive government, like governmental oppressive regimes toward leftist ideology. Because during the Cold War, there was this whole thing. What was it? No, not Ike. Who am I thinking? Who's the guy I'm thinking? My memory for names always fails me. McCarthy, that's what it is. We like the left as a political like group was targeted by McCarthy. There's like, we went through years of McCarthyism, so you can't make the argument that like the far left is too extreme. You need to decide. You need to already like measure out what is extreme, what isn't extreme. Because if you're telling me that guys like Matt Walsh aren't extreme, but somebody like Bernie Sanders will say is extreme for their left-wing views, then that's all about how you're measuring that. And then then I have to ask, okay, if these are the values, if the center is, if where you're determining the center is more far to the right, that doesn't mean that the center is right-wing. It means that your measurement of it is like this is, anyway, let's just continue. We'll just continue.
I think it's extreme what this ideology teaches, that to dissent is to somehow contribute to an
and it's like, what ideology?
That the immutable identity of the person making an argument supersedes the merits of what they're saying, and that there's a sole cause for disparities we see in society today, and that to argue against that is to cause violence to the quote-unquote marginalized. This is extreme language, saying things like, if you don't pick a...
Is it? Okay. Let me hear what these arguments are.
Echo chamber. There are many around the crowd is taking.
Also, let's be clear. The right wing is not devoid of an echo chamber. Like there's also that aspect where like it's very obvious when you say one side is in an echo chamber, and like you only focus your attention, you only focus your critiques on that one side. It's rather obvious that those people are going to ask you, wait a minute. There's a very obvious echo chamber and a much larger echo chamber, much more well-funded echo chamber on the right. Between Fox News, Daily Wire, PragerU, all of these other large $1 million funded institutions, they have just as much of an echo chamber. But somehow you're only able to see an echo chamber when it's on the left. And again, if you say there are echo chambers on the left, I would say no shit. Yeah, there are. But if like you're saying that there's only echo chambers on the left, that's when I'm like, that's when either your political tool is busted, or you're just lying, or you're just doing the thing that gets you easy views, which is quite frankly parroting right-wing talking points, such as the left is the only group on an echo chamber. So
discourse, then you're alienating a lot of people. I want you to know, and I know this from having my own realization about the people around me, that unless you're sealed off, tightly in an extra isolated echo chamber, there are many around you who are nodding along to what you're saying, but disagreeing in silence, A, because of the mob of people that will attack them and try to ruin their personal lives, and B, they've come to learn
those would be called cowards.
To have a fruitful dialogue with someone who believes that to hold any other view than the one they hold is to be oppressive. I mean, you think that...
Well, if that view is that there is a oppressive force that bears down on people of color in this country due to systemic racism, then yeah, I would say that you're kind of siding with an oppressor. I don't know if I would say that phrase, because I think that's a bit inflammatory, but like it's not wholly inaccurate.
The people who oppose you must be some sort of an extremist because you're not aware that what you believe in is itself extreme. Because if you did, you wouldn't believe in it.
And what's extreme about that?
Sort of the whole point. I think it's extreme what this ideology teaches. That to dissent is to somehow contribute to an oppressive system.
Yeah. If you're going to defend an oppressive system, then yes, yeah. If the thing you're defending is an that is
the immutable identity of the person making an argument supersedes the merits of what they're saying, and that there's a sole cause for disparities in society today. And to argue against that is to cause violence to the quote-unquote...
Wait, there's a sole cause? Yeah, it's called systems. It's systems of oppression. That's what we mean by systemic racism.
Marginalized. This is extreme language. Saying things like, if you don't pick a side, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. If you're not actively engaged in politics, that comes from a place of privilege. Whether or not you're aware...
To a degree.
That's emotional blackmail. You need to stand with us. We need not convince you by the merits of our arguments, but rather by appeal to your emotion. If you don't want to be isolated, if you don't want to go against the cultural headwind and be labeled a dinosaur or a bigot, you need to stand with us. To be clear, not all progressive people who believe those views are like this, and in fact, there are many progressive people who are kind and considerate of other people's opinions.
Right, yeah, and everyone always puts this in, where it's like, I'm not saying it's everybody, but like, that's the only thing you focus on. And when you say the left, when you're gonna label an entire side as like participating in this, it doesn't matter what qualifier you put on, that you're like, well, I don't mean 100% of everyone, I mean like 85 to 90, like 3%. Like, no, you weren't specific with your wording earlier and you're making up for it now, but you're still being irresponsible.
But enough are like this that it's becoming a noticeable problem. It may be easy for you to think like, oh, he's saying this because he's a right-wing conservative, which like,
oh yeah, this is definitely a studio.
That is certainly your prerogative. And as a normative matter, there's nothing wrong with being a conservative.
That's correct.
As a descriptive matter, I personally don't think it's all that accurate. Because yeah, I've certainly departed from my former leftist views, and after a lot of reflection, I do stand firm with conservatives in saying that this wokeism ideology is taking us backwards. But there are...
and again, God, I wonder if I could talk to this person. Genuinely, I might actually reach out and see if I can talk to them. They're a rather small YouTube channel. I'm incredibly small. I think they could. I don't think it's impossible that I could get a hold of them.
There are traditionally liberal things that I continue to believe in and would disagree with conservatives about. For example, I believe that unions are the only means by which workers can gain power and leverage and engage in collective bargaining. And while there are some issues with certain public sector unions, like teachers unions come to mind,
such as, so again, this is like, okay, you're in favor of unions because you understand that unions are a net good for workers. But teachers unions, what the fuck do teachers unions do? They do all of the things you just listed. So which one do you actually believe?
But I don't like it when giant corporations like Starbucks engage in union busting tactics. And look, I believe in a robust social safety net. I'm not particularly fond of when people call it a handout, but here's the difference now. In my past,
but what's a handout?
When someone will call it a handout, I would go on the offensive and say, this term is racist because it's associated with the notion of a welfare queen stemming from the late 1900s.
Yep, because that's usually the dog whistle you would be correct in this. If somebody says that like social safety nets are handout, are just government handouts, are just giving away money to poor people who don't actually need it, then yeah, they're referencing welfare queens from the 1980s, which was just a way to racially paint specifically black women as like dubious, lazy, living off of the government dime, off of your tax dollars. Like, yeah, like that's what they're hearkening back to. Like, it's rather like, you can say like, oh, maybe they don't know that, sure, but like, we're not, at the end of the day, like if somebody's saying that and you explain to them, hey, like there's a like you probably heard this, but like here's the history behind it, most of the time people get defensive. So and like most of the time it's like the welfare queen stuff isn't even like based on any like facts or anything. It's just like stereotypes in somebody's head. So if somebody's bought into those, it's not hard to think that like, well, they probably also hold some other, some not great racial stereotypes for black people.
I don't make those kinds of arguments anymore. I've come to see also the other side of the argument now and realize that such programs, when administered inefficiently, creates perverse incentives for people who are capable of working to avoid work. Some of that is actually going on right now. I've seen it firsthand. And as a general matter, we should not structure our incentives to lead people to act in a way that if everybody acted in that way, society would suffer. But then we shouldn't outright eliminate it because there are people who actually need it. So then the question then becomes, how do we fix our social safety net so that it becomes actually, means tested, that only people who unquestionably need it can access it? And how do we...
So also, like, okay, that, like, that's all fine. That is the middle ground take of, like, what if we means test it? Let me give you the leftist perspective on this. Instead of means testing it, why don't we have universal systems that everybody has an opportunity to benefit from? Everybody, regardless of where you are socioeconomically. Why don't we just do that? We make it fair for everybody. Everybody buys in the same way everyone gets Social Security when they get older, because everybody buys in. We do this with any of our other social safety nets. Like, we can means test it, that's all well and good, or we can make it a system where everybody's bought in, everyone has skin in the game, everyone everyone is benefiting from the collective goal of bettering, like, not just your life but your neighbor's life and your neighbor's life and everybody in your neighborhood's life.
We devise a system to encourage as many of those people as possible to eventually be able to live without government assistance, because
there's nothing wrong with living, there's nothing wrong with government assistance.
I don't know how that can be done, but the point is that the people who are calling it a handout are using that term, perhaps not artfully, to speak to those valid concerns.
Probably racially.
I'm not going to use that term myself. I've come to the new understanding that trying to angrily shut down people for using that term is, not doing anything to advance the dialogue or to convince people who disagree with you. Rather, what I was doing in my past was I was getting the narrative upper hand by racializing it in order to silence dissent. And I was doing that fully aware of what I was doing. And look, like, I get
this is also like so also, like, this is such a self-report, because at the end of the day, like, he said his radical leftist views. Means testing is not leftist. I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry to let you, I'm sorry to inform you. Maybe nobody else has, like, said this, but, like, so far, any of the views that this guy has prescriptively described him supporting, like, any of the policies that he's mentioned so far, none of them are radical or leftist. They're liberal. The ones that he's talking about, like, what he would, like, even the way you would go about that conversation isn't, like, leftist. Like, so I don't know what any of this is. Like, at the end of the day, if you did that from a dubious place, if you thought to yourself, oh, I can call them racist to shut down the conversation of this and this and this, then, like, I don't know what to tell you, man. That's a you thing. That at the end of the day is a you thing. Because if I were to bring up, any of the welfare queen stuff, any of that, it's not to, like, shut down a conversation. It's not to, but it is an attempt to educate and to, like, advocate for, like, the reasoning why that approach or that rhetoric is counterproductive, but also, like, then advocate for a more egalitarian system. Like, but if you're not doing that, if you're only doing the part where you're, like, if you're only doing the part where you call somebody, like, a racist, or, like, you're just like, oh, well, that's whatever, then, like, that's not, like, there's always going to be people who do that, and it's always going to be a thing that people do, I think, whenever they're arguing politics, not necessarily bring in racism, but be more, I think, transactional with their language and with their approach to the conversation. But, like, this by no means is a left-right thing. This is a universal way of communicating political rhetoric. Like,
because I think there is an enormous amount of pressure on us to pick a side and stick with that side for every issue. And I was part of the problem because I used to be one of those people that sort of looked down on moderates, like, oh, you wishy-washy jerk, pick a lane.
Whoa, hard, strong language.
And I'm not saying this to disparage you. If you are firmly on one side or the other, you know, everyone has different life experiences, values, and conception of right and wrong, and you're entitled to your political beliefs, you know, that align with all of that. But I just think that our public discussions would be more fruitful if maybe not all of us, but more of us began to earnestly and fairly consider the merits of what the other side is saying, and B, if more people who aren't right-wing Republicans began speaking out against how extreme the left has gotten with this wokeism ideology in the past 10 years, we will perhaps see a greater push.
Again, it's always like, give me a definition of wokeism. I need you to define this in a way that isn't vague and can't mean 800 different things and also only one thing. Like, this is overall the problem. If I'm describing conservatism, I am talking about a conservative ideology which is interested in the defense of traditional institutions, of traditional values, those traditional values, traditionalism, right? So like when I say conservatism, I have a very specific set of ideological biases that I have in mind. But I don't know what wokeism is. I don't know what being woke is. Is it being an SJW blue-haired liberal that is that's very apologetic for being white? Maybe. Is it like somebody who's is it a Black Lives Matter protester? Maybe. Is it an immigration activist or even an indigenous activist? Could be. I don't know what fucking wokeism is, because it's not anything. It's just a catch-all term for everything that's not right wing, for every policy prescription, for every ideological bias that isn't right leaning. That's all wokeism is. They call Biden woke, they call Bernie woke, they call Warren woke, they call everybody is woke except for conservatives and Republicans. That's all it is. It's not real. It's not even there's a reason why there's hardly any kind of strong concrete definition. It's why they all use it, because it can mean anything. And I want to take this in good faith and everything, but how can I, when it's you're not identifying the group you're talking about, you keep using catch-all terms that are just again, just not right wing. That's all woke really means nowadays, essentially. And so it's all this oh, I'm trying to be good faith, oh, I'm trying to be a centrist and da 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 da, and it's all right, that's fine, but you're not really staking any ground, and you're not really defining anything. And also, once again, if we want to talk about wokeism, are we not going to talk about MAGA? Are we not going to talk about the populist movements on the right? I'm sorry, but one of these groups is ostensibly fighting for the civil rights of trans people and the equalization of Black people in our society. Regardless of whatever you think, progressives, leftists don't believe that trans people have the same. Let me rephrase it. That Black people do not have the same rights in terms of existing in this country, do not have the same kind of chance to succeed, the same kind of chance to participate. And they also believe that trans people are being targeted by governments, small state governments, that will end up, genociding them. We're going to take a look at that later. Meanwhile, the other side is rioting at the Capitol, is actively trying to take the rights away from people, actively trying to what's it called? Shave off whatever percentage that they can of non-Republican conservative, usually also, by the way, that aligns with non-white votes in counties that they control. What are we talking about here? How are these things equal, or even this is, most of this is most of this, quite frankly, is fucking Twitter brain. This is Twitter brain. When you think, ugh, man, there's all these woke lefties who get on Twitter and talk about restorative justice and systemic racism and oh my god and everything else. Meanwhile, out in the real world, there are real things happening. There are real policies being pushed. There are real laws being implemented that are going to negatively affect large swaths of our society simply for the inherent values of their existence. But that's not interesting because, you know, we got to talk about woke culture. Again, whatever that ends up meaning.
Pushback against what so many of us are not okay with but are scared to talk about. In my opinion, you know, as it stands today, and I think I'm being fair here, this kind of censorship and intolerance of difference of opinion is far more prevalent with the progressive left than it is with the conservative right. How many incidents have you seen of right-wing conservatives marching onto college campuses to shout over invited...
Do I need to say it? Do I actually have to say it? January 6th. Also, I think he's talking about like college campuses, to which, okay, sure. First of all, let's be clear. More people who are left-wing attend college. So you're also that's more of a selection bias thing. But let's take that at face value. You're right. A lot of leftists do protest speakers on college campuses. Would you like to know the protests that the right engages in? Because if we're just coming to this, if we're going by what he's saying, does the right ever protest? Doesn't seem like it, right? And yet, have we not watched protests by right-wing members of, militias or even communities who show up at, family-friendly drag shows with weapons? The Proud Boys. Like to me, I can't help be like, wait, so none of these groups exist to you? You've never encountered the Proud Boys? You've never encountered what's the other one? What's the Boogaloo Boys? You've never encountered like right-wing militias, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, any of these guys? And when you've just decided that like no, far right like fascist extremists don't really like, they're not on my radar, then no shit you're gonna notice like, oh wow, like seems like a lot of leftists have gotten rather extreme. Well, yeah, the temperature on the entire country's kind of gone up. The country's gotten more polarized. But like, if you're not going to be aware of what both sides are participating in, then I can't take you seriously. I just think you're just biased. You just don't see it. You haven't been introduced to the information. You haven't watched like any of the number of Vice documentaries, anything really. Like you've just been, oh, well, man, the right wing seems to be always agreeing with me, and they got me 3.5 million views on my YouTube channel, and I'm now sitting at a probably above average for the amount of videos I've put out, YouTube subscribers, so they don't seem like too bad of people, right?
Speakers to try to get them kicked out. I think there's many people across a spectrum of beliefs who would like the progressive left to turn down the temperature. So if you are interested, here are some tips on
I got like one drop from that entire thing.
Or a roadmap
God damn it.
to the middle. First of all, you should befriend people who have different political viewpoints than you do. Sounds simple enough, right? But it's really important. When you befriend someone from the opposite side of the political aisle, it humanizes a faceless entity. You get to know the person, you start to develop trust and love and respect for that person, and then you start to question, how does someone whom I love, trust, and respect hold the kinds of views that I thought only immoral people held? Is there something that I'm not seeing? And if you hear that and then you're thinking, how can I be friends with someone who doesn't believe in my basic right to exist? That is the exact type of thinking that I'm talking about.
But how do you do that?
Your interpretation of their...
This dude made an entire video on how like the black community is there's like an anti-Asian sentiment within the black community. So like what? Like that's not a problem for you? Like that's not something that you're like, oh, maybe maybe I should like think about a little bit further. Also, I want to keep in mind, do we all remember this from last week? This guy is going on about how like you need to make friends with people who don't hold your political beliefs. You need to interact with people and humanize people who are not who don't hold your same political beliefs, right? Meanwhile, a representative in the Republican Party, Marjorie Taylor Greene, an incredibly popular one, We need a national divorce. We need to separate by red states and blue states and shrink the federal government. Everyone I talk to says this. From the sick and disgusting woke culture issues shoved down our throats to the Democrats' traitorous America Last policies, we are done. This got, let's see, 78.3 thousand likes, 33.4 million views. So, I don't think, a lot of lefties got in here and kind of laid the smackdown on Marjorie Taylor Greene, me included a bit. But like, who's calling for a national divorce? Who? It's not the left. It's not progressives. It's not any of us. The entire time he's telling anybody, he's telling his audience, whoever the fuck is watching, he's putting out there like, look, lefties, you gotta learn to empathize and humanize people who don't hold your political beliefs, because you've isolated yourself so much that you don't see them as people like you see them as enemies, as oppressors. And these are people who just disagree with you, and maybe if you humanize them more, then you would come to the realization that maybe your political beliefs are too extreme. Meanwhile, Marjorie Taylor Greene is going out there, a representative of Georgia, somebody who works in the federal government, is on Twitter actively supporting a national divorce, a split of the country on ideological lines per blue state, red state, liberal, and conservative ideology. Nobody on the left spectrum at all calls for this stuff. There's only one side that talks about civil war. There's only one side that calls others traitors. There's only one side that says people don't exist, so it won't count when you genocide them. That's coming up a little bit later. So, like, again, I gotta ask, why is there this hyperfixation on the left? It might be because he's like a former leftist. So those are the groups that he ran in. And maybe he was let's be honest, it sounds like he was a cringe lefty, which they exist. They exist on all sides. But like, dude, like, any of the cringe lefty, like, if a black person says it, it's more valid, even though it might be like segregationist, so it's okay. Like, let's be clear, that's a right-wing like perspective on identity politics. That's not a left-wing like take on identity politics. I don't know. It's just, it's always funny,
their views. An out-of-touch interpretation at that. Because I can guarantee you that none of these people that hold these views hold them thinking, oh, I want to deny certain groups the basic right to exist. They hold them because they think it's the right thing to believe in. And when you befriend people from the opposite side of the political aisle, it shatters the illusion of the faceless evil entity. And you realize that
does he think that the right does this for the left?
On the other side of your argument.
Even though, again, they call like leftist traitors, un-American, terrorists, jihad, like leftists get called everything under the sun. And again, it's just like, all right, so only one side.
Then you also start to realize that what makes a person good or bad is far more determined.
That's why this isn't the middle. That's why this person will never understand. Will never be in the middle.
When I went to college, my first friend, the first person that I talked to at orientation, was this Indian American guy from the rural parts of Illinois.
Cool.
And he was a staunch conservative. We had diametrically opposing viewpoints, but he was the nicest and the most considerate guy ever.
Yep.
And we became close friends. We would often debate politics over drinks, like cool people do. But we actually had a falling out. Towards the end of my junior year, he made this Facebook post in support of Trump when Trump was a candidate. And I was like, dude, I know your viewpoints, but how can you possibly be supporting Trump?
Yeah.
And I just cut him out of my life.
I feel like a lot of people did that.
I took that to be evidence that Trump was this divisive figure.
Wait, so yeah, that's your fault then. That's your fault for being like interpersonally shitty. Also, if somebody like that, you don't owe that person your friendship. Also, I never understand this. It's like at the end of the day, it's like, I don't owe my friendship to anybody. If I want to be friends with you, regardless of your political ideology, which I have friends who I hold very strong, aggressive opposition to from a political standpoint, I'm friends with them because they're my friends. but like that's a choice that I've made. Like if you made that wrong choice, I'm sorry. Like I don't know what to tell you, but like that's on you, man. That has nothing to do with the left. It has nothing to do with ideology. It has everything to do with you.
But looking back, it was me that wanted nothing to do with my friend. He didn't want to cut it off. He wanted a dialogue. And I didn't acknowledge my role in the whole situation. I blamed Trump for losing a friend. But it was actually me. All the things that
my dad's incredibly conservative.
How I knew he was a kind,
I get along with him
and caring person.
Perfectly fine.
I just saw him as this label, a Trump supporter. And now I also think to myself,
yeah, it's called cringe. It's also called essentialism. At the end of, well, that's technically not essentialism, but like at the end of the day, like that's one of those things where like I know liberals who do that, and like yeah, it's like not great. I wouldn't like you should always at least try to like talk to people about this stuff and try to like come to some kind of I don't know about agreement, but some kind of like again, I don't even want to say middle ground because it's not middle ground, but it's some kind of understanding of each other. And sometimes that's you're able to work in that, and sometimes you're not. But like that doesn't have anything to do with left-right dynamics. That has everything to do with your interpersonal like skills, basically.
Regret how lonely he must have felt, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that cut it off with him. And it took him a lot of courage to speak up for what he believed in so publicly, especially at a school like UCLA. All that is to say,
it takes courage
I think we would all be far better off, if we stop shunning people and
I will say that
with people.
It does take courage to hold
if people are serious about bringing civility back
non-mainstream
this is something that people should
political
consider.
opinions.
Secondly, you should consider watching news from both sides. This is something that I actively try to do, but it can be so difficult at times because you get frustrated watching someone say something on TV that you disagree with, because it's like a one-way dialogue, right? You can't say anything back. But this is also really important. And that's because we've gone past the point of competing news sources, presenting the same news with their own ideological bent. If you watch news from both sides, you start to realize that they're presenting completely different news stories. Except for the headline grabbers that all news sources will invariably share, for the smaller news stories where there is much greater editorial leeway to share or not share, the news media will share it only if it comports with the worldview of their core audience. And I think that this is not the fault of the media, it's the fault of consumers who think that their chosen news outlets is, somehow betraying them if the outlets start sharing, too much news that run counter to these consumers' worldview.
You mean like Trump supporters and Fox News declaring the election for Biden early? I think first, actually, because we already know, like, we know factually that like Fox News as a company was concerned about the loss of their audience once they after they declared Biden won the election.
Look, this is not good for.
Doesn't happen this doesn't happen for liberal media.
News from one side,
mainly because liberal media is centrist.
Listen to and
liberal media already does.
Side, you miss out on all the smaller news stories that
does like conservative stuff, does liberal stuff.
Your worldview. And so when you do that day after day, it builds up, and then you collect this repertoire of events that you've seen from the world that leads you to believe in certain things. And when one news story that conflicts with a worldview, makes it on to the headlines of your chosen news outlets, because it's such a big story that can't be avoided, the repertoire of hundreds and hundreds of videos that you've seen over the years serves as a mental shield. It allows you to say, oh, this is a unique exception, not the rule. It changes nothing. Even though there are far more smaller news stories like it that hasn't come to your attention. And third, the last tip I want to share with you.
Oh, this is definitely a studio.
Radicalization is to stop attributing bad motives to people that disagree with you. Both in your mind and in the things you say.
God damn, are those big fucking things of Cheez-Its? Or of Cheetos?
The merits of what people are saying. This is something that we see all the time, and this is something
that
I've experienced
tiny little kitchen
from law students in their late 20s. You have no idea what's going on in my head. I'm saying all of this because I believe this to be true, but it's oftentimes easier to score cheap points by attributing bad motives to people that disagree with you. But these ad hoc...
You would think he would also kind of know this, because I'm assuming if he's in law school, he's probably engaging with a lot of like one-on-one debates, to which it's like, yeah, they're not interested in changing your mind. They're interested in changing whoever's in the audience that came in agreeing with you or thinking that you already had the answers or had the explanations. The goal is almost never, ever to change the person's mind in like any kind of public setting, like of like that person that you're talking to, especially if it's on a debate stage or in any kind of like setting where you're talking strictly about like this or that topic. So like, yeah, like
common attacks do very little to convince people that disagree with you or are on the fence about it. Rather, it's just red meat that you're throwing to people who agree with you.
People like red meat. What can I say?
This is something that I personally have a hard time with as well, because I think that the progressive left does not truly care about Asian people. You know, from the things that I'm seeing, it feels a lot like we're being used as political pawns. That when it fits their narrative,
that's really funny to me, but okay.
We're a victimized minority, but when it doesn't,
let's be clear, if I go and search on conservative online media, the only time you will see anybody who is not white is two scenarios. If it's Candace Black, in which case doesn't matter, it's basically not somebody it's basically still a white person. But two, you're not gonna see Asian people. The only times it comes up in conservative media that Asian people even hit on the radar for them is when they're pushing conservative values. Just like the dude the other week with his like, based Asian guy owns the liberals, even though he didn't own anything. Like, he just spouted the same nonsense and got shut down each time. And same with this video. This video got traction only really because the right wing was like, hey, there's an Asian guy who's saying the things that we like, so now we're gonna signal boost him. This is laughable.
New oppressors. There are people out there saying that Asian kids studying hard to get good grades, that's white supremacy. And I think that's completely
Who says that?
So
I would love to hear who says that.
Espouse those views. But when I argue with individuals, I have to try to stop myself from thinking, oh, this person, doesn't care about Asian people because they believe in this. For all I know, they could, in their minds, believe that they do care about Asian people and that what they're advocating for is in the best interest of Asian people. So then what good is it going to do if I just go on the offensive and say, oh, you're anti-Asian, instead of laying out the reasons why I think that the progressive left, what they're teaching is diametrically opposed to the long-term interests of Asian people. It's so much easier to do that, to attribute bad motives to...
Well, first of all, the real question is, what are the long-term interests of Asian people? And are the interests that you lay out going to be actually reflective of all Asian people? It also, there's also a point to this where it's like, okay, well, is this like, is it like are you just speaking for Asian people, or because you're Asian, in which case you'd be buying into that whole somebody's identity equals their merit or whatever? Or have you come to this through community outreach, through like community interactions? But like, even still, like, again, I don't know what he's talking about, so I don't know what I'm supposed to respond to. Like,
opponents, but in the long run, that's to your own detriment, because if that's your position, nothing that your opponent says, no matter how objectively meritorious, will be able to penetrate your mind. And if you think of yourself as someone who values truth and objectivity,
also everyone always thinks they're the good guy. Nobody ever thinks they're the bad guy.
These are my 3 tips. I hope you enjoyed the video.
Overall, yeah, I mean, once again, I don't know if I said this for the last video that we watched. I don't think I did, because it didn't come up in the same kind of way. But like, I'm still left with the overall opinion where I'm like, yeah, it seems like you're only coming at this with an understanding and a perspective from one side. We can talk about radical like leftism, like we can, it's fine. I'm not gonna say you can't talk about it, but we can't talk about it in a vacuum, or not in a vacuum. It would be uncharitable to talk about radical leftism without acknowledging the existence that radical leftism overall, from my perspective, comes as a response to the radical right populism that we see, that we've seen cropped up since, honestly, I would say the mid to late 90s, and has been building to these moments, building to kind of seed politicians like Ron DeSantis, like Donald Trump, like a lot of these other guys, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, these sort of people. All of these people. Oh, thanks, Out of Spoons. Hope you find more spoons. But like at the end of the day, like we've gotten here because of kind of the movement that's been built over these last 30 years. Man, I'm old. But yeah, and like not acknowledging that like is just a red flag. It tells me that you're a bit biased. But either way, I don't know. You know the thing. You know the thing that they tell, like at the end of all YouTube videos where they tell you to like click on one of these like things to watch more videos. Yeah, I've been meaning to film one of those. So that's what I was doing. I was just setting it up to film one.